Hundreds of thousands of protesters entered the streets in Israel today in response to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to overhaul the country's legal system. Striking workers have already caused major disruptions to commerce and shipping. They've called off work after Netanyahu fired his own defense minister because he called for a pause on the plan that would see the prime minister take considerable control over the judiciary, including the ability to appoint judges and overturn rulings. In an interview with Talk TV, Netanyahu assured Piers Morgan that democracy is safe in Israel despite the unrest.
Israel is in turmoil at the moment, facing what some fear could turn out to be civil war.
Oh, God.
Fears of a potential third intifada. Is this your biggest challenge right now?
It's a very big challenge, but I think that the prospects for Israel are great. I think there is a lot of concern about the democratic judicial reform that we want to move ahead with. But people think that it's going to result in a fissure that I don't think will last, because people will see at the end that Israel was a democracy, is a democracy, and will be even a stronger democracy after this democratic reform. So I think you're right. There's a lot of tension right now, and I wish it wasn't so. But I'm quite confident that we'll get over this difficulty, because you have to reform things that get ossified. And in Israel, what we've had is the ossification of the imbalance between the three branches of government that has to be corrected.
The Prime Minister is set to speak about the protests on Israeli television sometime today. Joining us now to weigh in is former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and partner at Democracy Partners, Joel Rubin. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you. Thanks, Robby.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Maybe you could start off by telling us more about what these reforms would actually accomplish and why Netanyahu thinks they're so important.
Yeah, well, Robby, reforms is just a false way to describe them. These are not reforms. What these are an attempt to have a judicial coup in Israel to essentially undermine and eliminate the Supreme Court's ability to be a check on the balance of power in Israel's democracy and give fiat to the prime minister. It's important to remember that in Israel, the Knesset, the parliament, that is a body that is also the one that appoints the prime minister who sits in that body. So there's no real executive legislative tension like we have here in the United States. The only check on that executive's power in Israel has been the Supreme Court. And now these proposed changes would allow this current prime minister to appoint more judges and allow the current Knesset, the parliament, to override any decision by the Supreme Court, meaning that it would essentially be one man, one party rule.
So we heard Netanyahu describe this as reform, saying that the current system has become ossified. What justification is he using? What is he pointing to argue that some kind of changes need to be made? And can you help us understand a little bit how the various players in Israel are reacting to this? Obviously, there's people protesting in the street. What level of approval do you think Netanyahu has for these kinds of things? And where are the objections coming from?
Yeah, Bri, right. This whole idea that it's ossified is concoction. It's just not true. What it is an issue that Benjamin Netanyahu didn't even run on when he was running recently. He ran on other issues related to Israel, and then his coalition came in and wanted to make this the first priority. The opposition is broad, and the opposition is deep, and the opposition is not partisan. We are seeing the whole breadth of Israeli civil society come out, in particular after the firing of the defense minister last night. The defense minister that Netanyahu himself chose from his own political party to safeguard the nation. That defense minister 2 nights ago said that Netanyahu should stop with this maneuvering. In addition to that, the president of Israel, a consensus figure, has said he should stop. We're seeing the labor unions, the school, universities, business leaders all come out and say this has gone too far, including Defense Force reservists who are saying they will not fly, they will not go to their reserve rotational duty. And so the opposition is the kind that we really haven't seen in Israel ever in its history when it comes to protesting the government's actions. Israel is a very unified state. There's a lot of common purpose. The whole country goes to serve in the military at age 18. And so there's a real common sense of bond within society. But this is different, and this is seen as a push by the extreme right of Israeli politics, individuals who have a very hard right settlement mentality that do not want to see the courts, which have oftentimes been the last check against extreme settlement maneuvering. They don't want to see those courts in place any longer, and that's why Israelis, broadly speaking, are objecting.
You know, I think it's interesting to compare to the U.S. situation. So here in Israel, you have Netanyahu, a right-leaning figure, trying to exercise, trying to, get more power over the court for the legislative function, for the executive, and you explained those are concentrated in the same body. In the U.S., I hear people on the left, liberal, fairly mainstream Democrats call for reining in the Supreme Court, which is conservative controlled, or even abolishing the Supreme Court outright. I guess with that, and the argument that those people make is that it would be more democratic to take power away from the Supreme Court, give it back to the legislative and executive bodies. So here, that's the reverse. Is there a tension there? Are people calling for the abolition of the Supreme Court or significant reforms to the U.S. Supreme Court? Are they acting out of they would say that's pro-democracy, but that would be consistent with what Netanyahu is trying to do, isn't it?
Well, what Netanyahu is trying to do is erode democracy in Israel. Democracy globally is under assault. We're seeing it in Hungary, we saw it in Poland, Brazil, here in the United States, where institutions are continually eroded, institutions that safeguard the rules of law, that provide checks and balances. And so that's what the Netanyahu approach is right now in Israel, is to erode and eliminate essentially a safeguard for Israeli democracy. I have to mention, I think this is very important as well, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is under indictment. And it's lost on no one in Israel that if these reforms go through, this push goes through, he will potentially be able to exonerate himself and no longer have to face any kinds of criminal indictment. And that's just a bridge way too far. Now, comparing it to the United States, we have 3 branches of government written into our Constitution. This is also very important. Israel does not have a constitution. At the founding of the state of Israel, there was a decision made to not write a new constitution. It was an agreement between the founder of the state, David Ben-Gurion, and religious parties that the one constitution would be the Jewish Bible underneath it, but there would be a administrative law built up over decades. So there's no real constitution. The Supreme Court is that bedrock right now, and it's been nonpartisan for decades. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is not following the American tradition. He's actually going opposite the American tradition.
Well, Joel, let me ask you this. I wonder, we just did a story about Trudeau and Biden talking about their pushback against global authoritarianism, how the last bill work against it. What kind of responses, what kind of statements have come from the West, particularly the United States, about what's been going on in Israel in these protests? And have there been any questions put to Biden's press team or anybody else in the administration about what they feel about what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing here?
Well, Bri, as you know, nothing that goes on in Israel is disconnected from American politics. Pro-Israel advocacy is very strong, and so the president and his team have been weighing and balancing. But we're seeing a lot of activity coming from Capitol Hill, calling for the president to get engaged. Last night, the National Security Council spokeswoman made a strong statement, in particular in response to the firing of the Israeli defense minister, who is a direct partner with the United States military. And it's worth reminding folks, and I'm sure people know this, we provide $3 to $4 billion of military aid to Israel directly. And so Netanyahu fired our primary interlocutor, and that's very destabilizing from a security relationship perspective. So there's been more voices in the EU. Rishi Sunak as well met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. They did very gently behind closed doors. But democracies around the world are very concerned. This is why we see the support for Ukraine right now in the fight against Russia. NATO countries piling in to support it. To lose democracy like Israel would be a disaster for the global democracy movement. And clearly the Israeli people are having none of it. And that's why they've been going out in the streets now for 3 months and counting.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
More Rising after this.